Alrighty, Thomas. Hope you're having a good Sunday. Um, want to really get this video out to you just so you can kind of take a look at your mechanics and just compare it to a MLB pitcher, professional pitcher, so you can just kind of see what y'all both do similar, and also the key differences with both of those. Obviously, on the bottom, I have a guy by the name of Emmanuel Clase. He's the closer for the Cleveland Guardians. Used to also pitch for the Texas Rangers back in the day. So wanted to compare your mechanics and then go over them. So without further ado, here they are. All right, now as you can see, obviously I slowed down y'all's Clase's mechanics, just so we can really see every single bit of each of y'all's mechanics, right? So we'll very first start off with the position that Clase is in right now, right? This is the very first thing we worked on whenever you got there on Wednesday, which was your position, right? Whenever we're thinking about pitching, right, our goal is to create explosiveness, right, is to create power, right? Just like how whenever we're in track on the starting block, we want to create power, right? And we want to get in a really powerful position that we can explode, right? So very similar, we have these two, differences, right? So obviously, Clase is in a stance that's a little bit shoulder width apart, right? For us, what we worked on is that we were shoulder width apart, and we also brought this foot just a little bit forward, right? So that it's easier to lift up, okay? So that was the very first thing we worked on, right? The next thing I want you to take a look at is I really want you to take a look right here at how high that Clase really brings his leg, right? Take a look at that versus yours, right? If we notice, right, Clase brings his leg up so high. And if you've ever watched whenever you go to a Ranger game and you wonder why do these pitchers take their legs so high, right? The whole goal is that they are trying to create energy, right? They're trying to create power. Whenever we go back to that kinetic versus potential energy, right? That we are trying to build up so much potential energy that we have to take it towards home plate and just transfer all of it quickly into kinetic energy, right? So whenever that happens, right? So the two things we're trying to do is, number one, we're trying to build power. The second thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to get our hips in position that we're able to create better hip-shoulder separation, right? And I'll actually show you real quick what hip-shoulder separation looks like. Take a look at Clase right now. Notice, right, his hips go just slightly before his shoulders do, right? That is the thing that kind of creates that little click for him, right? That creates the release of all that power, right? It's almost like if you were to pull back a rubber band, right? That is what we're doing in hip-shoulder separation. Our hips are going before, just a little bit before our shoulders to really create that rubber band effect so that when we're ready, we can fire it, right? So that is what hip-shoulder separation is, if you were wondering whenever we were talking about the other day, okay? So that's one thing I want to work on next time, is really working on bringing this leg up just a little bit more and working and continue to work on feeling into our back hip. I know we worked on both those things, right? And I want to continue to work on that going forward, right? Now, one thing I want you to take a look at between Clase and you is that you two are two different types of pitchers, right? So Clase is an accelerator, okay? So what an accelerator means is that their first movement is going to be forward, right? So if I play Clase's, right, his very first movement is not down, it's forward, right? So he's using more gravity rather than ground force or power, right? For you, if you were to take a look at what you do, Thomas, your very first movement is down with everything, right? And that is a textbook driver, right? A great example is Max Scherzer, right? That's another guy who really, next lesson, we'll take a look at his videos a little bit more too, and really talk about what he does as a driver, right? But the reason why I wanted to compare y'all's mechanics is y'all have very similar things that you both do in your mechanics, right? For one, the biggest thing I would say that y'all have in similarity is how explosive you are, right? Now, granted, I'm not gonna sit here and say Max Scherzer is an explosive, right? But both of you kind of do this Dominican twist, okay? Now, in this video, Clase doesn't do it as much, right? He used to have the Dominican twist more so. But essentially what the Dominican twist is that there's this stopping point right here, right? And your head doesn't go through the window, right? You use more of this rotational power rather than traditional over-the-top power, okay? Now, Colossae has turned more into a traditional-ish type pitcher, but he has still, even if you take a look at his hips right now, right? He's still much more of a rotational guy, right? So the Dominican twist is all about rotation, right? And you have a lot of rotation whenever you pitch, right? And now, probably the question that is going through your head is, well, is that a bad thing? And the answer is absolutely not, right? Pitchers have different ways to get the most output, right? Just similar like with our arm action, right? Some pitchers are from the sidearm, some are submarine, some are way over the top, and for you, you're a 3/4 arm slot, right? That is where you get the most natural output, right? So, with that being said, that's what we're kind of going to go into right now. With that being said, there are a couple things that we're going to transfer over to your Dominican twist that is essential in terms of pitching, right? We can't obviously stay like this whenever we're pitching, right? So we're going to go into the differences, right? So first and foremost, right? Whenever we take a look at our hip, right? The one thing we talked about was leading with our butt cheek, right? If you take a look at yours versus Colossae, notice he's leading with this towards home plate, right? Right? Now, at first, you're also trying to do that, right? But what we talked about in our lesson is that whenever you do it, right, what you try to do is you try to twist yourself, right? Instead of when we worked on it later on in the lesson of using using your back hip, right? And really hinging that back hip to get ourselves into this position right here, right? So that's something that we worked on in our lesson and you did a great job of, okay? And I want you to keep building on that. Another thing too, right? Whenever we get to right here, take a look at Colossae, take a look at you, right? Actually, this is more of a better angle for Colossae. It kind of stinks because we're not really linked up. Actually, let me see if I can unlink y'all real quick and relink right here. There we go. Okay. Now we're linked up right here, right? So, if you notice with Colossae, right, his lower half, really, really explosive, and yours is getting there, right? Understand, it's going to take time, right? Colossae is in his 20s, right? You're not, Thomas, right? So it's going to take time, okay? But one thing I want you to see is look how far out he extends, right? That's why whenever we did that towel drill on Wednesday, why I really wanted to get you to go out and extend, right? Is because that's going to help you release not only more velocity, but also release more perpetual velocity, or rather your perception of velocity to the batter, right? So one thing I want you to take a look at, right, is when we get to this angle, right, if you notice, Colossae here is still loaded with both his hips and his shoulders. They're still closed off, right? Versus for you, Thomas, whenever we get to this point, you're already opening up, right? So instead of really landing first and then starting to open, it's more so when we get to this point, we're beginning to open and we just hit initial right there, right? Versus Colossae is fully loaded in block position on the ground and is still loaded up to then begin his hip-shoulder separation, okay? So that's why we go into block position and we start working to throw, right? Is so that when we get into a landing position, that's where we start our block position. So that's kind of the why of when we get into block position, why we do it, okay? So that's another thing I want to continue to work on with you as well. One thing I think you do really, really well is getting your arm above your shoulder. You do a fantastic job of getting your arm above your shoulder, just like how Colossae is doing right here. And one thing as well, take a look. We have a lot of layback, right? That's what we want. That is what's going, if I were to put a mast right there, right, what we want to do is we want to basically flick, right? If I were to take a look right here and put a mast right here for Colossae, notice it just goes over, right? He's not pushing versus for you, Thomas, you're kind of pushing a little bit, right? And we'll continue to work on that, right? We don't want to push our elbow, right? Because, again, that puts stress on our elbow. And the last thing we want to do is to put stress, right? We want to alleviate as much stress as possible because pitching in general is a very stressful, how should I say this? It's stressful, quote unquote, trauma on the arm, okay? What I mean by that is it has a lot of impact on the arm, right? Every single throw, like we talked about, whenever we're throwing, it's like if we were to hold 5 12-pound bowling balls, right? There's a lot of stress going on that elbow, right? So we want to alleviate as much stress as possible whenever we pitch, right? So with that being said, right, that's something we're going to continue to work on as well. One thing I think you do fantastic is your finish, right? It's not straight up, right? A lot of kids, whenever they first start, they're very much straight up like this almost. We have tilt for you, right? That is a great building block that we could continue to work on, right? I know in our lesson we talked about our logo should be towards the bottom of the mound, right? That is something I want to continue to build on, right? And that you're doing a great job of, right? So I want you to build on that, okay? Last thing I want to talk about with you is your finish, right? Now, I want you to take a look at your finish with your back leg here versus Clase, right? Notice how Clase comes up and over, right? Versus you are starting to come up and over and then kind of curl out to the side, right? The reason why we want to do that is it's almost like we're extending out, right? Notice your front knee. It wants to straighten out, just like Clase's is about to here in just a second, right? Notice Clase straightens out. Your knee wants to whenever it gets to this point, right? And it does it a little late, right? So instead, what we really want to think about is kicking this back leg up, okay? It's almost going to be like being like a scorpion, right? I actually have a drill that we can work on next time that's really going to help with this and really make it a little bit easier for you. So we'll work on that next lesson. And obviously from there, we'll continue to work and, continue to grow. But otherwise, Thomas, I think you're at right now a great place in terms of pitching. We have a crazy amount of potential with you to continue to grow. So obviously, I want you to keep working. Remember the homework of obviously dry mechanics and really working from prayer hands to butterfly to bear. But then as well, just going straight up and down just to work on balance. But until next time, man, keep grinding.